The room smelled like old coffee and cheap carpet glue. I was holding a folder that was supposed to save my father's shipyard. Then the woman at the head of the table set down her pen and looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. 5 years ago, she said, you didn't ask my name before you pulled me out of that water. I never got the chance to ask yours. I didn't recognize her. Not at first. That's the strange thing about the moment your whole life turns. It doesn't knock. It just sits there, quiet, in a folding chair, waiting for you to notice. 3 months before that morning, the hardest thing I thought I'd ever do was bury my father. I was wrong. He used to say it every time I shipped out. A yard isn't steel and rust, Maya. It's who you trust to keep it afloat. I thought that was just something fathers say to stop you from worrying. I didn't know yet it was the whole case. Waiting, 5 years early, to be argued in a room like this one. My father, Walter Ellison, built Ellison Marine and Machine by hand on a strip of gravel shoreline that flooded twice a year. 3 generations of engines passed through that shop. I grew up under a hull with a wrench in my fist before I ever held a rifle. He died on a Tuesday, quietly. In the back office, on the cot he kept for nights when a repair ran long. At the funeral, my Uncle Dean, my father's younger brother, hugged me for exactly as long as it took the photographer to get his shot. Growing up, Dean was the one who taught me to bleed a brake line and read a boat's trim before I was tall enough to see over the gunnel. He was also the one who never once got handed the shop's ledger, not even for an afternoon. That always stayed with my father, and later, with me. I never thought much about what that must have looked like from where Dean stood, watching the books pass him by year after year. I didn't think about it, not yet. 11 days after the funeral, a certified letter showed up in my mailbox. The envelope was still warm from baking on the dashboard in the sun. I tore it open standing in the gravel lot, grease still caked under my fingernails from a job my father had left half-finished. And I read that the shipyard's operating license now belonged to Dean Ellison. Not me. 4 tours taught me how to stay steady when something explodes nearby. Nothing taught me how to stay steady reading my own dead father's forged signature. Dean's lawyer called it a filing correction. I had another word for it. I just didn't have proof yet. I couldn't afford a maritime attorney. The one I reached on short notice read the transfer agreement for 4 minutes, then told me, gently, that contesting a licensing transfer with no documentation was an uphill climb at best. So I did what 12 years of engineering had trained me to do when a system fails. I went looking for the fault line. 3 nights at my father's kitchen table. Every invoice, every receipt, every repair log, going back 6 years, spread out under one hanging bulb. On the counter by the coffee maker sat the chipped enamel mug he drank from every morning before opening the bay doors. Chipped on the rim since the day I dropped it at 9 years old. He never replaced it. I noticed that, working late those nights, more than I expected to. Dean's whole claim rested on a single detail, that he'd personally financed the yard's engine lift upgrade 2 years earlier. Proof, his lawyer argued, that Walter had already started handing the business over. I found the canceled check for that lift. The bulb above the table buzzed, the same way it had since I was a kid doing homework under it, and for a second I could almost hear my father telling me to check my math twice before I trusted a number. I checked it 3 times. Every dollar Dean claimed as his own money traced straight back to Walter's signature. Then I found the date on the transfer agreement itself, the 9th of June. I knew that date. My father had been in the hospital that week, emergency hip surgery, after a fall on the dry dock stairs. He couldn't have walked into an office that day. He could barely sit up in bed. I should have taken what I'd found straight to a lawyer. Instead, I made the mistake of asking Dean, directly, why his lift payment didn't match his own bank records. The question alone told him everything. I didn't need to show him a single page of paperwork. The fact that I was asking that specific question was proof enough I'd already found the discrepancy. He knew exactly what I had, and exactly how close it sat to the truth. 2 days later, a flatbed truck backed into the yard and hauled out the hydraulic lift, along with 2 of the older engine hoists, under a work order Dean had signed as acting operator. His explanation, when I called, was almost bored. Routine maintenance. Off-site. Nothing to worry about. I stood at the edge of the empty bay where that lift had sat since before I could walk, listening to an empty chainfall swing against nothing, and I thought about how many times I'd watched a supply line get cut on purpose, just to force a unit into a bad decision. Fast. This was the same move. He wasn't maintaining anything. He was starving me of time because now he knew I was digging, and he needed the board to see an empty shop before I could prove whose money had filled it. That was the night I stopped thinking of this as a family disagreement. Rosa Bennett kept the shop's books for 11 years before she retired. I found her address on an old holiday card, taped inside my father's desk drawer. She let me in before I finished introducing myself. "I signed something for Dean," she said, before I'd even asked. "Business papers," he told me. "Tax forms." I didn't read every page. She went pale the moment I showed her the transfer agreement, her own name listed as witness. "I was never in a room with your father when this was supposedly signed. I didn't witness anything." She still had her old accounting ledger, on the page for the 9th of June, in her own handwriting. "Office closed. Walter in hospital. No appointments." I brought everything to a legal aid attorney who agreed to take the case pro bono. She read the ledger twice, then looked at me over her glasses. "Here's the only rule that matters at a hearing like this," she said. "A liar is more afraid of a paper trail than he is of an argument. So we don't argue. We file the right document at the right moment, and we let the board do the rest." I wrote it on an index card and kept it in my jacket pocket. I'd need it sooner than I thought. The preliminary hearing was held in a county annex building that still smelled like fresh paint. Dean's attorney stood first. He didn't come at me with insults. He came at me with numbers. "Captain Ellison has been physically present at this shipyard for perhaps 6 weeks out of the last 3 years, he told the board. "In that time, Mr. Ellison here covered 18 months of payroll out of pocket. He personally signed off on every safety inspection this yard has passed. He has 3 years of work orders on file naming him acting operator. Work orders Walter Ellison himself countersigned. Every one of them. Whatever a private conversation between brothers may or may not have settled, the board is looking at 3 years of documented operational control. That isn't a technicality. That's how a shipyard is actually run." 2 board members nodded. This time, not slightly. My face went hot, the exact way it used to when a superior tore into me in front of my own unit. Except this time, the numbers he was throwing sounded like they might actually hold. Somewhere through the wall, a radio was crackling faintly from the harbor office next door. The same static hiss I'd grown up hearing beside my father's workbench, and underneath that small, ordinary sound I thought, I have run convoy logistics under fire. I have kept people alive with worse tools than a filing cabinet, and for the first time since this started, I'm not sure the board believes me. I said nothing. My attorney had told me not to react, and for once, my training made that easy. It didn't make it painless. My attorney stood. "Before the board weighs Mr. Ellison's claim of operational control," she said, "I'd like to enter Ellison Marine's financial records for the past 2 years." She laid the canceled checks side by side with Dean's sworn claim. The payroll he covered out of pocket traced, every 2 weeks, back to transfers out of Walter's own account. Labeled, in Walter's own handwriting, D. Payroll. Dean hadn't been funding the shop. He'd been spending Walter's money and calling it his own. His attorney opened his mouth to object. The board chair simply raised a hand and kept reading. Something shifted in Dean's posture. Small, but real. Then Rosa was called. Under oath, She confirmed she had never witnessed Walter Ellison sign any transfer of the license, and that her own ledger, time-stamped the same week, showed the office closed while he lay in a hospital bed. She went further than that, unprompted. In his last year, she said, he signed whatever Dean put in front of him without reading it close. Safety forms, work orders, all of it. Not because he was handing the shipyard to anyone, because he trusted his brother, and by then, trusting people had gotten easier for him than reading fine print. That was where the counter-signatures came from. Nothing more than that. Dean's attorney asked if Rosa might simply be misremembering. Rosa didn't blink. "I forget where I put my glasses sometimes," she said. "I don't forget a man never walking through my door." Then my attorney played the recording. My father had kept an old marine radio logger bolted above his workbench, a habit passed down from his own father, who used it to speak a log of every job out loud. Buried in a box of old logger tapes, dated 3 weeks before he died, was a conversation between him, Dean's voice, asking for the license outright. My father's voice, tired but certain. "This yard doesn't go to whoever asks loudest. It goes to the one who keeps coming back to it. Deployment after deployment. Storm after storm. That's Maya." That's not up for negotiation. I sat there hearing my own private mantra. A yard isn't steel and rust. It's who you trust to keep it afloat. Spoken out loud in a hearing room, and for the first time since the funeral, I let myself cry. Before a single document had been entered into evidence, the board chair, the same woman who'd recognized me the moment I walked in, had already put it on the record. A personal connection, 5 years old, disclosed in full. She stepped back from more than the vote. She handed the rest of the hearing to the board's vice chair and sat at the far end of the table for the remainder of the morning, saying nothing else until it was over. It was the vice chair who turned to Dean and asked, directly, whether he disputed that the voice on the tape was his own. Dean stared at the table for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't think anyone would find it." The board revoked the fraudulent transfer and restored operating authority to the arrangement Walter had maintained until his death, with me recognized as the designated successor pending resolution of the estate. The falsified documents were referred to the county prosecutor's office for review. On the record, not as a footnote. Dean didn't just lose an argument. He would have to answer for what he'd filed. He was the one asked to leave the building first. Dean found me in the parking lot afterward. He didn't try to excuse it. "I spent my whole life standing in his shadow," he said. "I thought if I couldn't have his respect, I'd at least have what he built." He looked down at his hands. "I knew it wasn't right the day I put it in front of Rosa. I told myself it wasn't really stealing if it was already family money. I knew that wasn't true even while I was saying it to myself. You could have asked me for help," I told him. "You chose to erase me instead." I didn't forgive him that day. I told him I'd cooperate with whatever the county needed, and that if he ever wanted to work on an engine again, it would be as an employee, not an owner. He nodded. He didn't argue. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the harbor board chair. No legal language in it at all. She wrote that she'd spent 5 years wondering if she'd ever get the chance to properly thank the stranger who wouldn't let go of her hand in the water, and that stepping back from the vote had been the only way she knew to say thank you without making the case about her. She'd recognized me. She hadn't saved me. The evidence had done that. She just hadn't wanted anyone in that room to wonder which one it was. I think about that letter more than I think about the hearing itself. A liar is more afraid of a paper trail than he is of an argument. It turned out to be true of Dean. And it turned out to be true of me too. The truth never needed me to shout. It just needed me to keep showing up with the receipts. I kept the shop's name exactly as it was. I put my father's old cot back in the office, and the chipped mug stayed right where it always sat, by the coffee maker. If this story reminded you of someone in your own family, the one who keeps showing up, storm after storm. Tell us about them in the comments. And if you want more stories about family, loyalty, and the ones who refuse to walk away, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.